This is the second of 3 videos from Father Simon Cuff on Catholic social teaching, produced for the Formation and Learning Program at St Benet's Church, Cambridge. The first, on dignity, is on our YouTube channel. The third will follow on subsidiarity, structural sin, and the option for the poor. To find out more about our Formation and Teaching program at St Benet's Church, please visit our website at www.stbenetschurch.org or send an email to the vicar.
Hello again. In our first video, we began to think about the tradition which has become known as Catholic social teaching and the importance of human dignity as the foundation for that tradition. We talked a little bit about how in Pope Leo's foundational document Rerum Novarum, human dignity and the corresponding right to justice meant Pope Leo argued for a fair or living wage. I just wanted to begin our next video, which sets out to look at some of the consequences of this notion of human dignity, just to underline some of the consequences for focusing on human dignity in the way Catholic social teaching proceeds, before looking at two principles which really correspond to that, namely the common good and the concept of solidarity. It's worth saying that the radical extent to which this foundation of human dignity is pursued can be underlined really by a recent example of Catholic opposition to the death penalty. Until Pope Francis's pontificate, the teaching of the Catechism on the death penalty was that it was basically to be avoided, because to promote the death penalty was not to promote life and was not to recognise the dignity of even the person who has committed a crime which may be punishable by death. But there were possibly some very small set of circumstances where the safety of others meant that the death penalty was permitted. Pope Francis has shifted the teaching of the Church on this to better bring out the foundational nature of human dignity, arguing that there are no circumstances in which the death penalty should be pursued, and in fact that Catholics and other Christians have a duty to campaign for the abolition of the death penalty, because to have a system of punishment which includes the extinguishing of life fails to recognise the inalienable dignity of even those who have committed crimes that are currently perhaps punishable by death. So even the worst offender still is created in the image of God and is still shares in Christ's taking on of humanity. And we are to treat even the person who is guilty of a crime which may be currently punishable by death in some societies. We still have to recognise the dignity in them that they have not recognised in others. Now, I use that also as an example of how some of the emphases of Catholic social teaching have changed. We'll see in a second that where Catholic social teaching arose at the end of the 19th century, in a context where there were debates around property, communists saying property should be abolished and property was the root of all evil, capitalists saying that property must be freely owned. The Pope sides against the communists with the capitalists and claims that the Church has always taught that private property is a fundamental right, that the idea that property is the root of all evil is misguided. We'll see that, in fact, is itself a shift in thinking, and that actually the Church generally has taught that property is best privately administered, and we are stewards of the property that's entrusted to us, but we're not. It's not ours by right. In fact, that notion will be pushed further over the course of the 20th century, to the point where Catholic social teaching begins to talk about the universal destination of goods. Each and everything we own is destined to serve the whole. And we are to ask ourselves, how do we best use the things that God has given us? Before we get on to property and the common good, which we'll do in a second, I wanted to underline really what is at stake with building a system of practical action and thought on this foundational nature of human dignity. One of the things that, and I think it's the biggest challenge for us as Christians, is that if you are acting in such a way that you truly recognise the fundamental nature of human dignity in the people with whom you are acting, one of the consequences for that is that you can no longer instrumentalise people. You can no longer make someone else's dignity lesser in order to promote your own selfish wants and needs. What do I mean by that? All of us are probably guilty, if we live in the wealthy West, of neglecting to think through some of the chains of transmission of goods and production of the things we take for granted. The batteries in our iPhones, where our clothes come from, where our goods come from, the people who, even in our country, serve us, the drivers who we hail on our apps, and the people who deliver our goods very quickly and at almost no cost on very low pay. We are guilty of, in pursuing a convenience lifestyle, instrumentalizing those people and not acting in order to promote their human dignity, by not giving them decent working conditions, by not, as Pope Leo pointed out, paying them fair wages. And I think recently, during lockdown, the people who we often overlook most were, it turned out, actually the people on whom we relied: supermarket shelf stockers, carers, cleaners. The people who we needed to survive and needed to make us safe are the very people we don't recognise in society. And so, and not only do we not recognise them, we also instrumentalise them. We prioritise our convenience and enjoyment over their dignity and well-being. And so, one of the things that Catholic social teaching is against is the instrumentalising of human beings. And for us as Christians, that might be the most challenging, particularly for those of us who are members of a church community. How do we build church communities where people aren't instrumentalised? That we don't just see people as numbers to say we're having a great and successful growing church. How do we see people more than just people to fill out rotas, as for all the many things we need to do as a church? How do we truly work together as brothers and sisters in Christ to create communities where the dignity of each of us is really recognised and has the chance to flourish? How do we as Christian communities create environments where all of us are concerned with the flourishing of each other? And I think that's a question that as Christians we need to wrestle with all the time. So one of the consequences of this focus on human dignity is the notion of the common good. And in the Compendium of Social Doctrine, which is a book that came out in 2004, collecting all of the teaching that has become part of Catholic social teaching and really synthesizing it, it's almost like although Catholic social teaching is fundamentally drawn from the Bible, the Compendium of Social Doctrine 2004 is really the Bible of Catholic social teaching. The Compendium of Social Doctrine describes the common good in this way. It says the common good does not consist in the simple sum of the particular goods of each subject or social entity. Belonging to everyone and to each person, it is and remains common, because it is indivisible, and because only together is it possible to attain it, increase it, and safeguard its effectiveness with regard also to the future. Just as the moral actions of an individual are accomplished in doing what is good, so too the actions of a society attain their full stature when they bring about the common good. The common good, in fact, can be understood as the social and community dimension of the moral good. The common good is that good which exists above and beyond the good of particular individuals. It's the good that exists between us, and it's a good that exists because we are recognizing the fundamental dignity of each and every human being. If someone is harmed by an action that would make otherwise the majority better off, the common good is betrayed. And so it's a search for those things which will benefit us as a whole over and above those that will benefit a particular part of society. Now, often, and we'll see this when we come on to the preferential option of the poor, stuff which benefits the lowest and the marginalised in community will benefit us all, because it will end some of the processes which make people poor and marginalised. And if we're not currently poor and marginalised, we can't think that we're not outside those systems which generate poor and marginalised people. So the common good sometimes demands that we do focus on minorities over majorities in order to bring up the whole of society and for all of society sharing that good. But it never sees the simple majority promoted at the expense of the minority or the marginalised. The second thing to say about common good is that within Catholic social teaching throughout its existence, one of the themes has been how do we best use property? As I said, coming from a tradition where a context in which the communists were saying property was bad, the capitalists were saying property was good. Initially, Pope Leo in Rerum Novarum in 1891 made private property a universal right. That broke with a tradition within the Catholic Church that said that property was commonly owned but should be privately administered. That private administration is the best means of stopping people squabbling, says Thomas Aquinas, of making sure it's used correctly, of making sure that it's not property doesn't get into the hands of people who might harm others with it, so you don't give a knife to a drunk man. Over the course of the 20th century, increasingly, Catholic social teaching develops this notion that it returns to the earlier notion that property is not ours by right, we are stewards of property, and so we need to ask ourselves, of all the very many things we have, how are we using them for the benefit of all? How are we using them for the common good? Pope Francis's general audience on the 26th of August brought these themes together with the common good of our planet. The universal destination of goods, the money, the property, the stuff that God has given us, which is destined to be used by us for the benefit of all, or benefit of not just us, comes together, he says, when we think about also our common home. So how are we using the things genuinely to help everybody flourish, rather than just for my own selfish flourishing? A consequence of this focus on the common good, a focus on the human dignity of each and every human being, is the notion of solidarity. Solidarity comes into Catholic social teaching really through John Paul II and through the solidarity resistance movement in Poland and Eastern Europe. And it's that sense that we get in the Pauline epistles of that we are called to rejoice when those around us are rejoicing, and to weep when those around us are weeping, that we're called to recognise the humanity of the people with whom we are interacting. Pope Benedict in 2009 described solidarity as first and foremost a sense of responsibility on the part of everyone with regard to everyone. It's the sense that if something is happening somewhere to someone, it's happening to me here. And it's really important to recognise that this means that the sort of myth of the individual, that there are men and women are islands and our lives are not all interwoven. Catholic social teaching comes out strongly against that. In the Compendium of Social Doctrine in 2004, the compendium notes, never before has there been such a widespread awareness of the bonds of interdependence between individuals and peoples, which is found at every level. Partly this is, again, Christological. All of us, Christ came to save all of us as human beings. Partly this is because we are all created in God's image, and we all share in that image, and that's the primary notion that we're called on to promote. So, reflecting on the common good, reflecting on the principle of solidarity, Two questions for Christian communities who wish to promote these principles. How are we exercising our stewardship of goods and the assets that God has entrusted to us? And whose claim on those assets are we failing to hear? And secondly, how do we organise our Christian communities and our lives to promote the principle of solidarity? Whose voice isn't being heard, and how do we relate to people who aren't like us?